Hey folks, it's Julie here. Today's subject is going to be about the age-old debate, plotter versus pantser. If you don't know what that means, a plotter is the type of writer who plans everything out before they start writing. They write outlines, they write some kind of plans before they start, and they go according to a structured outline. And pantsers are the people who just kind of jump in and see where it goes. Now, to be perfectly honest, I have not actually heard a lot of fighting about this. I haven't heard people really bickering over whether it's better to be a plotter or better to be a pantser, because in the writing community, most of us understand that there is not just one way to do anything. Whatever works for you is what works for you. But what I want to do in this video is kind of go over some things that may seem pretty obvious, but if I lay them out for you, I will tell you about the pros and cons of being a pantser and being a plotter, and then I'll give you some final thoughts. So first of all, plotters, they are going to be, most of the time, they're going to be more organized. They're going to be a little more coherent with their first draft, but they're going to take longer to get started. And of course, if you spend more time in the planning phases before you actually start writing, you're obviously not going to get any words in your novel until you actually start chapter 1. Or you may be the kind of person who jumps around, but it's a lot easier to do that if you have a structured outline already. You can kind of nail down some of the key pieces and jump around if you want to, whereas pantsers usually have trouble doing that coherently because they have to know what happened before they know what is happening in a certain scene. Not that pantsers don't ever do that, because a lot of us will come up with a certain scene that we've been dying to write and just write it, and that's one of the cornerstones of what we build the book around. But more often, it's the people who have plotted something out in some kind of format, whether it's a structured outline or whether it's just a more general overview. But if they have some idea already in place of what goes where, they will most likely be able to write out of order. So, you know, those are some of the pros there, is that you're going to have an idea of where you're going. You're going to probably experience less anxiety about what's going to happen next or how you're going to solve this problem. You're going to also have an easier time pitching the book when you get to that part of the story, because a lot of people have a very difficult time boiling their book down into the beats and figuring out what their book really is about plot-wise, and a person who is a plotter is obviously going to have a very strong idea of the plot, and they're probably going to be better prepared to break it down because it started broken down and then expanded from that. Fortunately for the plotters, they also tend to come with a more structured book. They will have a beginning, middle, and end. They'll be less likely to have, I should say, rambly parts that go nowhere. And they will most likely have some idea of what each part of the story, each chapter, each plot line, where it's going, what it's doing there. They'll have a sort of more coherent overall piece. So again, that is not always the case, but normally if you do some plotting before you actually start writing, you will also have fewer drafts, and ultimately at the end it may kind of read a little tighter. And if you do tend to be a more plot-oriented writer, like not how your process is, plotter versus pantser, but if you have a very plot-oriented story, like a mystery where the clues have to be planted properly for the mystery to boil out correctly in the end, outlines really help. And you might only be able to start your outline after you've noodled with it a little bit in the beginning, but sometimes if you have a very plot-oriented book, it's good to have some kind of plot outline before you start. That should make a lot of obvious sense, but you know, when you see people trying to write mysteries and they don't really even know, they know how it ends, but they don't really know how it gets there, and everything kind of feels disorganized, only to kind of fall out at the end, and this was the answer, and it feels disorganized. That can be helped by doing some plotting ahead of time. One major downside for being a plotter is that many plotters do their plotting, do their sketching out, and then they never write the thing. And sometimes you can get so deep into building what you're going to write that you become really intimidated about getting started. And then another major downside to being a plotter is probably that you may not have as strong a feel for the characters. If you're focusing more on the plot beats, then you know what happens, but you don't have quite as strong a feel for who this is happening to or who is driving the action. And character personality can change a whole lot about a story. And any writer, even the most plot-oriented, structured person, has undoubtedly been surprised by something that happened in the story. And when you're focused on these plot ideas, and then you start writing these characters, and it turns out they're coming out differently than you envisioned, then you're probably, as a writer, you're most likely a passionate person who feels like these characters are very important, and they're going to practically insist that some things change. They may feel differently about what you're doing than you thought they would. And that probably sounds a little off the wall to people who don't write, but if you're not a writer, it seems weird that you would want to watch a video about this. So I'm assuming that I'm mostly talking to writers here, and we probably all recognize the idea of a character not really doing what they're expected to do. And with that, I'm going to move into the pantser side of this video. You may have noticed earlier I used the word we when I talked about pantsers, and that is because I am a pantser. I have really never had good luck plotting stories out. The one time I think I tried to write an outline before actually writing the book, I felt very cornered by it, and I ended up having to go back and do a lot of fill-ins because I felt like too much time had gone by in between these chapters that I wrote. So I prefer to write by the seat of my pants, which is where pantser came from. Now, of course, one of the major downsides of that is plotlessness, meandering, very long word counts in my case, and in the case of many other people. You may not really know where you're going. You're finding out along with your characters what is happening to them. So sometimes it really doesn't go anywhere, and you feel like you can't do anything about that because you're just kind of trusting them to lead you somewhere, and it's maybe interesting to you, and people who like that character may be interested in what happens to them, but you may not have much of a plot at all, and grafting one onto it can sometimes feel too restrictive and ruin the story for you. So that's probably the biggest problem for people who don't really plot. They just trust it to shake out somewhere, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you write a book, and you write another book, and you write another book, and they just don't really go anywhere that's story-worthy. So as much fun as they are to write, and maybe as attached as you may be to the characters, they may not really be sellable, and that's not the only reason to write, but now, of course, one of the biggest advantages to being a pantser is that you can jump right in on day one. You can immediately start writing. You can get excited about your story immediately. because you've got words down. I mean, not that plotters don't get excited about plotting something out, but you're actually in the story, you've got a word count, you're meeting your people, and there's not a whole lot more exciting than that in the writing world when you're head over heels with a new favorite project that's just the best thing ever, and you don't have to wait if you are not the kind of person who feels like you have to sit down and structure out what is going to happen from beginning to end, or at least some of the beginning. You may be able to have that experience right away, and then you may be more motivated to continue a project because you're in love with it, rather than some of the disconnect that may happen with some plotting where everything's kind of black and white and it may be interesting but maybe not as emotional as some people need. So I would recommend, as a word of advice here, if you're a plotter and you're finding yourself planning project after project that you end up just not writing or you don't connect, try connecting first. So this may be sort of a controversial thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I feel like there are a lot of people who are the more mature writers, or the writers who have been writing for a long time, tend to do more plotting than those of us who may be less experienced or may be younger. You can be kind of impatient when you're new or when you're young, and you want to jump right in, and you don't want to do the not so fun stuff where you have to do the planning. And some older writers or more experienced writers find that having an idea of where the heck you're going is a good idea. But as a person who's written many novels as a pantser, it is not absolutely necessary to learn how to write that way. It's just not in some people, and sometimes you're going to feel too caged in by what you've planned out, or you may just not be able to generate a story if it's only theoretical to you. You may have to be doing it in the character mindset. And there are ways that you can kind of get around that if you really want to try plotting, but you are not connecting with the story. There are ways to try that, like most notably trying to imagine that this plot that you're writing is in the mindset of the character who is going to be your point of view character, or one of the point of view characters if you have multiples. How would they describe their journey if they talked about what happened to them at the end of the book? So sometimes that can help you connect a little better, but there's not really a good substitute for just writing the actual book, so that may or may not work for you. So as a pantser, as I mentioned, one of the biggest issues I have had is meandering, repetitiveness, and high word count. So if you are a pantser, you can be prepared to do more editing than a plotter probably will. And you will be the opposite of them in that you will not have clearly defined plot points kind of pre-organized for you by your own project notes. So you'll have to kind of boil it down and figure it out when the time comes to pitch. Writing a query letter or writing a synopsis is a lot harder for a book that you haven't done that homework for already. And I've actually had some conversations with writers that they have to write a synopsis, which is basically hell. I mean, ask just about anybody. Writing synopses is a pain in the butt. But sometimes you have to have them for pitching or for sending along with a publisher's package or something. You write a synopsis, and I've had a couple of writers tell me that writing their synopsis taught them what their book was about. And in one case, the person felt after writing the synopsis that they wanted to rewrite parts of the book to make that clearer or to firm up those beats. And it's really interesting when we start looking at our stories from outside of it, like when you are immersed in it and you're writing this story and you get to the end and it was great fun, but now you have to maybe chop it down and make it a little bit more coherent. It's really interesting to see it from a technical standpoint and look at these things that you have, you've created a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. This is the denouement, this is the climax, this is the supporting character, figuring out what it is after the fact instead of putting it together like a puzzle piece, like a set of puzzle pieces. You're dissecting it after the fact, figuring out, oh, that's the name for that. And I don't know, that one's kind of a mixture of this and that. You're retroactively deconstructing and figuring out what your parts are, what your ingredients are. So you've realized that you're a baker eating your loaf of bread, and you're only just discovering what the ingredients are called or what their nutritional information is. So, to continue with the baking metaphor there, you may want to perform book magic, which is not available in real life for recipes, and go back in time and remove this ingredient and put this slightly different ingredient in there and see what the bread looks like. You can do stuff like that as a pantser if you're finding that had you thought more clearly about it in the first place, or had you foreseen the need for this, you may have used this ingredient instead of that one. You can change some pretty major things after you see the whole book from the ending. You can change some pretty major things and still have the heart of the book that you wanted to write. And it's not necessarily going to destroy the integrity, but that can be a little bit. How shall I say this? It can be a little bit heart-stopping to yank pieces out of your book that you're not sure until you do it, whether that's one of the supports the house is leaning on. And as you go forward in edits, it is really hard to go backwards. So pantsers deal with a lot more edits and a lot more uncertainty. So it kind of sounds like, especially since I associated plotting with maturity and experience, it kind of sounds like I'm advocating for being a plotter, but I mean, you have to understand I'm a pantser and I'm more about the passion side of it, the kind of going with the part of writing that you don't really understand, the wherever the passion comes from, wherever the inspiration comes from, wherever those surprises come from when your characters just shock you and do things that you feel like you couldn't have thought of. That's kind of the part of my writer brain that always wants to be a pantser. And even if I intellectually recognize that I might write more coherently or may write more straightforwardly the first time, may be able to have an easier to pitch book, and may have something that's a little less meandering and a little maybe less character oriented, because I tend to get really down into the brains of characters, and they end up very cerebral and very prone to internal monologuing, so sometimes I have to cut a lot of that. But as a pantser who values those aspects of the writing experience and the writing product at the end, I do feel like I would not sacrifice the writing procedure that has worked so well for me and that has been so satisfying, that has been something that really makes me want to keep going with what I'm doing and has worked to keep me invested in the projects that I start. So ultimately, there isn't a right answer. There isn't something all experienced writers do, plotting versus pantsing. There isn't one of those things that you graduate to from the other. There's not one that's necessarily less mature or less successful than the other. If you ask a whole group of professional writers, you're going to find a mixed bag, and you're also going to find people who have very specialized schedules and very specialized procedures where they might plot certain aspects of a story but then leave other things up to chance and up to whatever they're inspired to do in that moment. So there are hybrids as well. There are people who do a little of both. And what I would recommend here for people who might be watching this and you're a beginner and you maybe aren't really sure where to start, I'm just going to go ahead and be biased and say try pantsing first, because it's writing, not preparing to write. Writing an outline is also writing, but it's not writing the novel itself. It's kind of building the structure that will hold the novel up. And you can do that while you're writing, but I think it's more important, especially for a young person or a new writer, to fall in love with your work, and that comes from getting it started, getting it actually written from the beginning, from some part of it. So I recommend jumping right in so that you can start loving it. And the only exception, I would say, for that would be if in other areas of your life you tend to be more satisfied by planning something out or experience less anxiety if you plan something out. Go ahead and do that. You should do you. But if you don't know what to do and you don't have strong feelings one way or the other, or there wasn't a moment in this video where I described plotting or pantsing that you said that's me because you haven't had enough experience yet, you know, I'm gonna recommend my own camp and say try pantsing first. And if it doesn't work very well for you, or you're very frustrated by it, you get lost or you lose track or you abandon projects, which is exactly what you don't want to do. Next time, try a little more plotting. So that about wraps this up, and thank you for watching this video. I will see you next time.